tactics we will be discussing today is around Russia and how Russia exhausts information space and what tactics and manipulations it uses to manipulate public opinion. I also teach at University of Georgia, the disinformation analysis and fact checking. And yeah, that's me. If you want to follow me on Twitter, this is my Twitter handle. You also see the website, and you can search like different research and investigation from our organization there. I'm also on Facebook, and if you need me, you can contact me. And also Sandro has my email address. And if you have any follow-up questions, he will share my contact details with you as well. So before we go to today's session, very briefly, the program overview and the topics we're going to cover. I don't have dates here. I just screenshot it because it was easier from the website, but I'm sure you have the dates on the calendar. So today we will be talking about the narrative warfare, information operations, some propaganda tactics. And this is basically the intro to the topic. This will be like more discussing the case studies, some practical exercises, but this is mostly me talking and presenting some case studies, very prominent case studies, and how we approach investigation of information operations. And also I'll explain some case studies, how we did investigate the information operations. So maybe this is, I don't know, some ideas for you for your work in future. Then today we'll be talking about Facebook analysis, and after today we'll have more practical sessions with more instruments and online tools and open source investigation tools that are available. We'll be talking about some coordinated behavior and like how can we approach Facebook analysis, because we know that the resources of Facebook is very limited, and we're restricted in resources. Then the next session is verification of visuals, photos, videos. How can we identify some fingerprints on photos to identify the alterations, and how Russian propaganda uses images for emotional manipulation. We'll be talking about the websites, suspicious websites. How can we identify links between several websites? And finally, geolocation. I always say that geolocation is my favorite session because, I don't know, it's very, very fun. But to be honest, other sessions are also very fun, and it has this wow moment because sometimes we do not really think that these type of investigations are possible from our coach and only with one laptop. But yeah, this is the era we live in, and it's fun. Of course, it's serious. We are talking about Russian massive information operations, but like understanding that we have skills to investigate this type of operations is giving us very, very huge confidence. And yeah, for me, it's really fun, and I love doing this type of investigation. So let's go to the topic. Before that, we need to go through some essential terms. I'm sure you've heard of these terms, but very briefly, let's go through these terms so we are on the same page. During this presentation, we'll be using a lot of these terms like disinformation, narrative, warfare, info-ops, propaganda, etc. So disinformation is intentional dissemination of false information when the actor knows that it is involved in lie, so it's not unintentional. Misinformation is unintentional dissemination of false information, but this does not mean that misinformation is not part of disinformation circle, because there might be actor behind the info-ops involving disinformation, and they spread through multiple channels, and then I am the target and I might amplify that disinformation unintentionally. That angle or that circle or the part of that circle is misinformation, but this does not mean that behind that is not disinformation or the actor who spreads lies. Malinformation, we won't be focusing on this, but this is genuine information that is shared to cause harm, to discredit certain actors, for example, but this is not the focus of our presentation today. Propaganda, we'll be also using this term a lot. Today it is sometimes used as a synonym of disinformation, but it's not a synonym. We should understand that propaganda has huge history even before the online information operations appeared and internet appeared. Um, and it also has some positive purposes. And basically, this is systemic influence campaign, systemic information campaign to influence public opinion for the benefit of the actor who is behind the propaganda campaign. Information operations, this is not illegitimate in terms of like the legal terms, but it's illegal because it consists of deceptive mean and lies. It is attempt, how to say, harmful attempt to influence opinion formation, and especially ahead of elections, in pre-elections periods, it's very important to understand this type of information operations and purposes of the harms. And information operations might also include disinformation campaigns. Digital forensics and open source investigations, not for today, but other sessions in May are about these tools, analyzing digital fingerprints, identifying some technical and behavioral evidence to attribute certain actors behind information operations and disinformation, and open source intelligence, which is analyzing information which is open, basically, because it is everywhere, it is accessible for everyone, and it has very huge benefit in terms of establishing trust between researcher and the reader, because usually you explain all the methods, you cite all the resources, you cite all the sources, and it's replicable. So the reader can also conduct the same investigation independently. This brings huge trust between the researcher and reader, and that's why this is one of the benefits of open source intelligence. So this is our approach of analyzing these type of campaigns, info ops and disinformation campaigns, ABCDE framework, and this might be very useful for your work as well. When we find something interesting, this is the framework we apply. A stands for actor. So who is the actor? Is it like formal actor, state actor, non-state actor, foreign state actor, domestic threat actor? So actor is very important. And especially like tomorrow when we will discuss some coordinated networks on Facebook, social media platforms help us to identify the actor. So one thing is to analyze open source, which is available for us to identify the actor behind the operation. But then if Facebook, for example, says that, okay, yeah, we also investigated this network and we think that this certain political party is behind this operation or the network, this is a huge finding because we already understand that this is deliberate intentional coordination of certain political message or disinformation. Then B stands for behavior. What type of activities are involved in amplifying the narrative? So the third is content. So one thing is content. What type of content is out there? What type of narratives are in the disinformation campaign or involves campaign? But then another angle is to understand how that disinformation campaign or how that narrative is amplified. Degree and effect, which is also a very important step of analyzing information operations, because we need to understand the distribution and potential impact it has. I worked as a fact checker for 5 years and right before the DFR lab, and we had this policy that we are not reacting to all of fake news out there in Georgian information space, because like I'm based in Georgia, whatever, it doesn't matter. Sometimes newsrooms or groups might have some policies in the organizations that we're not giving oxygen of amplification to false narrative or false information, which does not really have like important scale of distribution. So that's why we're using some social media analysis tools to understand the scale of outreach of a specific narrative or specific keyword, or how many times the false information was shared. And then the effect, which is at some point very hard to estimate, because sometimes you need some formal public opinion polls, for example, to understand whether the disinformation was, I don't know, affected some decisions of people. But this one is the categories of measuring the distribution, the degree, and the effect. And this might help you as well to understand whether the false information is worth reacting or worth reporting on it. So these are like different categories, how it starts, how many platforms are involved, how many social media accounts are involved, for example. Was it reported by mainstream media, for example, and brought to mainstream discussion by traditional media or broadcast media? Cross-medium breakout. For example, if celebrities or I don't know, influencers or social media are involved. And then if there are some risks of policy responses or call for violence or mobilization, like online mobilization for offline attacks, or if it has some risks of offline effects as well. So this is like, we need case-by-case approach and then discuss whether certain false information or campaign or info ops falls in the certain category, what we see on the screen. And then the narrative. So today we'll be talking about Russian info ops and the narratives, and basically narrative warfare. And this is a screenshot from Merriam-Webster dictionary. Of course, it is something which is narrated, but narrated in a form that it gives us a story. So it is how you present certain facts or evidences or viewpoints. So it shapes your opinion and it shapes a story. So it is very important to understand it. It's not just a message or a text, but we should try to understand what is the narrative behind, for example, Putin's certain speech, and we'll be discussing some case studies. And narratives have like in this sphere, when we're talking about information operations and narrative warfare, have two purposes: to sow division and chaos in society, and also to influence perception, beliefs, and behavior. And I already mentioned elections, and this year is very important in terms of elections because we have elections like almost everywhere. And there is like a high risk of proliferation of harmful narratives, and especially in pre-election period ahead of elections, influencing perception and who people are going to vote is very crucial. And narratives are tailored to societies. There are, of course, overarching narratives. For example, West is bad is like the main overarching narrative of Russian propaganda, if we can say so. But there are, of course, tailored narratives to the societies, and especially in the last 2 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, after sanctions, after banning of Russia Today and Sputnik in certain Western countries, we saw very targeted, narrow targeted and tailored messages to specific audiences. And this is very good screenshot and example. And we are only on this one screenshot from Timothy Snyder, very famous historian. We see at least 3 narratives here. So if there is like conservative society, traditional society against LGBTQI rights, then they might say that like the Ukrainians are all gay and this is why we need to invade. If you don't like Nazis, they will tell you that Ukrainians are Nazis. If you like Nazis, then they will say that they are Jews. So at some point, these are contradictory messages, right? Opposing messages. And for ordinary citizens, for reader, it might be very hard to identify single actor behind these opposing narratives. But this is what we are trying to like research, investigate, and present that all these contradictory narratives are tied back to one actor, and these narratives are contradictory and opposing deliberately. They are tailored to specific audiences, and also the pollution. So it is harder for reader to identify truth in these very many opposing narratives. And also it is about the audiences. So in domestic audience, for the domestic audience, when Russia started war 2 years ago in Ukraine, the main purpose of the censorship of domestic propaganda of the different narratives and media coverage of war, what they called the special military operation of denazification, and they did not use term war, and this is already a narrative and very interesting to research. The main idea and the purpose was to maintain support. domestic support of the war. Russian propaganda targets Ukrainian audiences to demoralize society, so they are not willing to fight anymore. And we've seen a lot of disinformation, deepfakes of Zelensky and other messages with this purpose. In Western audiences, Russian messages proliferate to shape public opinion. So it mostly targets public and not the leaders, to shape public opinion, to decrease support to Ukraine, and then the global South audience to demonize West because of these historical grievances and the history of colonialism, etc. So Russia is using all the existing sentiments in certain target audiences to build upon those sentiments and then create like, or info ops or disinformation narratives. And this is very important to understand, because if we are creating disinformation, so like let's imagine that we are bad actors and we want to create disinformation, invent disinformation. We need truth and some existing sentiments and discussions so the disinformation is successful. So if it's coming from air and there is no ground of discussion of this disinformation in society, it won't resonate. So that's really important to understand. Now let's go back to history a bit and discuss one historical case. I'm sure some of you already heard about this disinformation campaign, but it's very famous case study and very nice case study also to compare the disinformation campaigns back in during like Soviet Union and today, and what is the heritage of Soviet disinformation campaigns and what changed in the modern info ops. So the name of this was Operation Infection, or it is also known as AIDS disinformation campaign, and everything started in 1983 when in India, very, very far away from Soviet Union, in English language newspaper, which was called Patriot Magazine, was published this article with this title: AIDS may invade India, mystery disease caused by US experiments. And very interesting facts here, like not the fact, but something to notice is that it is reported that this report was reported from New York. So that was for to gain more legitimacy and trust that this is not coming from India, for example, or the Moscow, because we now know that it was coming from Moscow, and KGB deployed this disinformation campaign in the Indian newspaper that it was coming from New York. And we already might see some parallels today, because Russian propaganda very frequently uses some notorious, I don't know, useful idiots, the former CIA, I don't know, the people who worked for like US agencies or some like Western talking heads of Russian media outlets, and their narratives and their messages and their comments are amplified in coordination. So the reader or the target audience thinks that this is coming from the Western experts and not the Russian experts. So this New York label here is already very interesting. But what was interesting about this article was that, like we already said the narrative, right? The disinformation narrative that mystery disease AIDS was caused by US experiments. What was interesting was that this article was also based on facts. It contained facts, a lot of statistics about AIDS, about distribution, like who was affected, all the factual information. So what we mentioned earlier, that we need some existing discussions and sentiments to resonate in public, using facts in this information campaign is also very important, so it is successful. And now when I'm a reader and reading this newspaper, I see that, I don't know, at least like 70% of this article contains facts. Okay, maybe I'm fact checking, I'm saying that these facts are true, but then I see that like 1%, 30%, 20%, whatever percent contains lies. So maybe I'm already prone to believe those lies because I already saw that the article contains facts. So this is how it was created. That was the article. And then it took several years before it was proliferated in Western audiences. Then we saw that like German doctors or researchers were also involved in the amplification of this narrative, and we can recall some like fake doctors and fake doctor experts when they were saying some crazy stuff about COVID-19 and vaccines. So this method using this, I don't know, talking heads and experts. So this is also not a new tactic. And then several years later, it appeared in the mainstream media in the US. So that meant a lot of proliferation of the narrative. And the aim why it was deployed in Indian magazine was to hide actual actor behind it. And in 1992, there was already recognition that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service was KGB was behind the operation infection. There was like one very interesting question for me. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was participating in one of the podcasts, and the question was that identifying actor in this era of information revolution is harder than it was in Soviet Union. And like my feeling and take on this is that I think that it was harder to identify KGB and Moscow behind this newspaper compared to how we are able to attribute certain actors to involves nowadays. Of course, there is, on one hand, the channels are multiplied, target audiences are a lot of target audiences, many contradictory narratives, and as we said, opposing narratives, and many channels. And in this chaos, it's really hard to identify the single actor. But this multiplication also means that there more errors and more fingerprints we are able to analyze and then tailor these fingerprints and errors to certain actors. So my feeling is that like tying one Indian newspaper to KGB would be more difficult. Of course, it has like, we might have different opinions about that, but they on the one hand, it's scary that we have this multiplication of channels, but on another hand, that really helps us to identify more errors and then identify the actors. So about this Operation Infection, there is very famous series of documentaries published by New York Times. This is how you can Google it, and I highly recommend. It's really very cool and with graphics, and humor is also amazing, and it's worth watching. So to summarize this part, and compared to like modern narrative warfare and info ops, we can say that Russia has same strategy, but of course there are different techniques and procedures, and we're calling this TTPs, and that's one of our aims to understand the new tactics. Narratives are mostly recycled and repeated. As I said, there might be certain new message targeting specific audience, tailored to specific domestic political or even like international political development. But broadly speaking, narratives are old and they are recycled and repeated. And creation of disinformation became cheaper. As I said, of course, it's amplified even faster. And became simple because of, I don't know, development of generative AI, for example. Nowadays, in like a couple of seconds and minutes, we can have content in multiple languages, and also like using AI to understand audiences, algorithms, etc. It's easier to target specific audiences and have understanding of specific audiences even better. So to compare this infection to modern infodemic, which we call the oldest disinformation campaign and coordinated disinformation campaign from Russia targeting the West and the US. And we'll see some similarities and differences, of course. It's early stages. What you see on the screen, it's the early stage of infodemic campaign. We were calling this Operation Infection 2 as like second series of infection operation, because like the topic is also very similar. In 2019, in Chinese forums, some of the messages that maybe it was artificial to target China, these type of messages appeared. But it was not blaming US very like directly and specifically. Then the earliest mention of this conspiracy in 2020, which our team found was January 4th on this Twitter. And it was interesting that this COVID and previous virus, SARS, was discussed together, and that it was artificial and it was spread specifically in Asia for bad purposes. And very soon in January, again, it's like 2 or 3 weeks period, we already see that in mainstream media, in Kremlin controlled media, we already see that someone, the expert, is talking about experiments in China. And one of the first experts who started this campaign was this Igor Nikulin, and he was very frequently cited. Um, and his title was one of the US agencies that he was like former employee of that US biological something. I don't remember the name, but fun fact about that is that that agency does not really exist. But the point is that like it sounded very professional, it sounded very official, at some point scary. It had US in the name, it had biological in the name, research in the name, so it like looked credible. And he was the guy who was talking as an expert that the COVID virus, was artificial. And then the next stage of proliferation is using some online media outlets, fringe outlets, mainstream media outlets to promote and amplify this narrative, referencing who? Of course, this expert who was invented. So this is fake expert. And we are talking like in this session, we are also talking about some propaganda tactics and techniques and creating these artificial experts, especially from West, as I already mentioned, is also one of the techniques of propaganda to justify your false claim. And then after amplification and proliferation of this specific narrative that it was created by the US, that it was artificial, that it's a biological weapon targeting China, et cetera, the next stage is that politicians take this message and then it has like more official amplification. So like politicians are citing again and referencing to the media outlets, and then those media outlets referencing to fake experts. And then we saw lots of documentaries on YouTube, on many channels. Some Western conspiracy theories also created some documentaries. One of very famous was called Plandemic, and it was amplified, I don't know, a lot. But the major shift is that in Operation Infection, we had like one major narrative, right? The West is bad actor, and AIDS was artificial experiment, and it took a couple of years before that message proliferated the Western audiences in the US. And there was one claim, and Soviet Union and all the resources, the KGB spent a lot of resources proving that that lie was truth. In this era, in the modern Moscow, there is the strategy to undermine the notion of objective truth, and using these opposing narratives, dozens of opposing narratives, is one of the tactics how to do that. So modern Russia does not really attempt to push one certain narrative, but push many narratives, so that citizens are exhausted by these narratives, and it is harder to identify truth. And also this issue of truth relativism really played very well. For example, saying that, okay, let's see what Russia thinks about Bucha. Maybe they also have their own truth. That already played very well in this campaigns and disinformation. So this is the major shift. Of course, the development of technologies, the speed of amplification of information, but also how Russia approaches this disinformation narrative. Okay, I want to talk about one more case so it better illustrates what I just said, and then let's pause and I'll give you one exercise to for your practice also to identify different narratives about certain topic. So this proliferation of many, many narratives, MH17, we also remember that in 2014 on the eastern Ukraine territory, the Malaysia Boeing was downed and killed almost 300 passengers. And we saw many contradictory narratives coming from Russian sources, official sources, media sources, sometimes at some point, like, I don't know, crazy narratives, the early stages of proliferating this info space with these narratives that some claim that it was a Ukrainian Air Force jet. Some claim that plane was filled with dead bodies to blame Russia. And this ties back to this famous Russophobia narrative that if you accuse Russia of doing something bad and you have all the sources and all the evidence that's proving that Russia is behind certain things, then the counter messages to blame West and opposing actors for Russophobia, that they hate Russia, and this is why they are claiming that Russia is behind a certain activity or operation. Of course, CIA was also blamed. NATO was also blamed. That Putin was flying almost like near that plane, and it was an attempt to kill Putin, and then it was not intended to kill the civilians, but they wanted to kill Putin, and they hit that plane. And then this was the initial phase of information operations, but this is very important, a very interesting infographics created by EU versus Disinfo, which is EU's East Stratcom Task Force database. Uh, like throughout the years, we've seen dozens of narratives about the MH17 and the downing of the plane, and many of these narratives are opposing. But the main thing here and main lesson and takeaway is that single actor, Russia, was behind all these narratives. Again, this is what has changed in modern era, and this is one of the tactics to exhaust the information space and pollute the information space. Let's pause for a couple of minutes. I'll give you this case study. Let's take like 5 minutes, but the case study is the Georgia Sluger Lab. This is very famous target of Russian operations and Russian disinformation campaigns in Georgia, and not in Georgia, not only in Georgia. For example, after the invasion of Ukraine, and I'm sure before, some biological centers were also target in Ukraine were also target of Russian propaganda. But basically, yeah, in Tbilisi we have this biological lab after Richard Lugar, senator, who helped to found the lab. It was, yeah, as I said, the target of disinformation. I'll copy these Russian keywords and English keywords in the chat as well. I'm not sure how many of you can work with Russian text, but if you can, or even if you can't, I'll copy the keyword. And in 5 minutes, please identify as many narratives about the Lugar Lab in English sources or Russian sources as possible. And also my ask for you is to compare results in Google search engine and Yandex search engine. Take the English keyword, not the Russian one, to have like more, I don't know, consistent and similar approach. So in Google, type Lugar Lab, and then in Yandex, type Google Lugar Lab, and let's compare the results. And also put in the chat all the narratives you find about the Lugar, and I'll copy these keywords right now. And also, like, if you prefer, you can use this EU versus the CIFO database. You can search Lugar Lab there, and you can also identify some narratives there.
So for what time you have for this exercise? 5 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
let's take one more minute and then we can continue. Okay, let's continue. Anyone wants to share the results, what they found in 5 minutes? Like one or two narratives about the Google one, false narratives, of course. You can also drop in the chat and I can voice those out. Have a guest. My dog is very emotional sometimes. So it needs hug. Okay. So these are some of the examples of the nerds about the Luger Lab. Of course, it's like years long, very consistent information operation targeting Georgia. Luger Lab was also hacked, and some of the documents were leaked. And one of the tactics of this document leaks and hacking is also to create forged documents. So it's proves, not of course not proves, but like attempts to prove the claim. And the Lugar Lab was target of this type of hacking ahead of elections a couple of years ago, and some forged documents with real documents. Like it was very mix of documents where appeared on a very suspicious website. So it's like huge info ops with multiple layers and multiple domains targeting the Lugar Lab. But on the screen, you see some of the examples, and of course, again, opposing and contradictory narratives. Some of those are very crazy, sometimes very funny. That I don't know. Like the one of my favorite is that the location is of the lab is near the airport, and that also became the source of and like the food for conspiracies that the lab was built close to Tbilisi airport so that viruses can swiftly be loaded into planes and deployed as weapons. We've seen the narratives that the Lugar lab was accused of spreading some diseases through mosquitoes, and not only in Georgia, but from Kremlin experts and Kremlin politicians, and even from Putin and different officials. We've also heard crazy conspiracies that we Georgians are exporting viruses and diseases to Russia as well. That they have like concerns about them. Lugar Lab. This Lugar Lab is also very interesting topic. It was very active topic before the pandemic, and maybe this is also one of the great examples how disinformation failed in certain country because at COVID times, Lugar Lab was very important facility for testing the virus and the testing people for COVID and having very fast results. And it was really very important for Georgians as well. And there was public opinion poll conducted like prior to COVID-19 that many Georgians thought that there might be something very suspicious happening in the Lugar Lab. And then after COVID, and like the number of people who believed or at least thought that there might be something suspicious dropped because it was very everything was very open, and also like society saw that the facilities were very important. But before that, before COVID, the lab was used as whataboutism and deflection tactic of propaganda for Russian disinformation. I remember I worked on research in 2018, maybe when Skripals were poisoned in the UK. And there were emerging reports and concerns that Russia was behind the poisoning of former agent Skripal in the UK. And then Russian media started talking about the Lugar Lab as a whataboutism tactic. So, like in the Western media, the headlines were that Russia is, I don't know, accused that these two guys were the KGB from KGB. And then, as a response in Russian media, we saw pikes in mentioning the Lugar, saying that the US was having some secret biological programs at the Georgian Lugar Lab, and that was the method to like respond to some of the concerns and claims. But why I asked you to search the Lugar Lab in two search engines is that the news aggregators and control over news aggregators is also one of the propaganda tools. For Kremlin, and this is very good evidence of how this is done. So if we search for Lugar Lab in Yandex, the first one is a Wikipedia article, but the second one is already viruses and bacteria of one of the laboratories. So again, like of death. Very strong title. And then in the Google, we see like different articles from very prominent Georgian organizations or fact-checking organizations. Again, the Wikipedia article, but from ISFET, like one of the local research organizations, top 10 accusations. So the informative articles, and this is evident if we search some Ukrainian developments, like these developments from the war or certain cities. And let's see some of the examples because it's as I said, this is one of the tools how information space is information domain is manipulated to shape a certain opinion about certain topics. So if we search, so this is a bit old example again from COVID, search for Pfizer and Moderna, and then the Russian Sputnik vaccine on the right. So all the mentions in Yandex, these are translated in red on the screen are very negative, with negative headlines about the Western created vaccines, and then very positive titles and headlines for Russia created vaccines. So that already shapes, at least attempts to shape opinion. Another interesting thing, if we search for Bucha, we see these very nice buildings in Yandex. In Google, we see the like images of war. And very interesting thing is that Google gives us recent updates and recent images, and we see some captions here, how many hours of the pictures were published. If you want to have same results in Yandex, it is not a default setting, so you need to change settings so you receive the newest updates. And how many people will do that? Of course, like it's very like almost nobody. When you type Bucha, this is what you get, and you don't really receive information about like war crimes and all these atrocities unless you change settings. And even if you change settings, then the articles that are generated are also mostly like false narratives and disinformation. So like this very specific techniques and tools that are used it's very important to have information about that and how these news aggregators are, and in this case, Yandex is used to promote Kremlin agenda and takes on certain topics. Again, another example, Mariupol, and this is Google result. One of the examples of narrative analysis. And I think this is very important example because when we do narrative research and attempt to understand bigger picture behind the narrative, it really helps us to predict some of the actions. And let's discuss one of these case studies, how we approached this and how it helped us to understand and truly say that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. This research was done by my colleagues. It was not my research, but my colleagues did it. Russian outlets steadily increased claims that Ukraine will start a war. And of course, this was not only an online domain. We've seen massive buildup of Russian military in Belarus near Ukraine border. And when you prepare for war, of course, it's almost impossible to hide it. And if you remember, these were satellite images that were published by Maxar, like from Maxar Technologies by Politico in November 2021. And even before that, like months before in spring, there were reports that Russia was deploying military equipment in Belarus near Ukraine border. And already in autumn and winter in 2021, there were like increased concerns and statements from Western leaders that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and like also this question that will Russia further invade Ukraine? And there were like two um, opinions that yes, Russia will invade Ukraine, and then another was that it was like scare tactic and it's Russia is bluffing and Russia won't invade Ukraine. So this was offline domain, and when you plan this scale of operation, when you plan war, of course you need justification in an online sphere as well, in an online domain, and especially in the early stages of war. Russia needed domestic support for war as well. And in order to analyze how this shifted, how the narratives proliferated, how Russian narratives changed in Russian media, we analyzed 10 Kremlin propaganda outlets that were like famous for spreading Kremlin narratives and agenda. And these were the keywords we analyzed. Of course, because of Russian grammar, we used the roots of the words. Ukraine, abbreviation for Armed Forces of Ukraine, provocation, and three different words that were frequently used in Russian media to describe attacks. So attack, assault, offense, attacks, so different words in Russian. And the time period of this research was November 2021, January 2022. So like they're very almost near the intermission, because we've seen increase of because it's the time frame was same when this Maxar Technologies satellite images were published, and it was really interesting to see how these activities were also reflected in an information domain. And from these 10 Kremlin propaganda media outlets, so we scraped up to 3,000 articles and analyzed these articles through those keywords, like these keywords, to understand the narratives. And of course, like this was the result of scraping. And of course, these keywords also were used for like all different purposes for different content, and excluding false positives is also like part of the methodology and part of the job. So like if you approach the investigations and analysis of narrative and narrative warfare, this is a very important step, because like we need to do that, otherwise we might have some false results. And the peaks in publishing articles were also very interesting. We saw spikes around December twice, and then in January we already see that almost a third of the articles were published in January. This means increased publishing and increased proliferation of specific narrative. And we also saw that in January, the narratives became even more hostile. So I'm talking about a month before the intervention. So in November 2021, the narrative was that Ukraine was violating the ceasefire agreement, and there was a possibility Ukraine could attack Donbass in November 2021. December 2021, the narrative was that United States trained extremists for the purposes of attacking the Donbass. And then in January 2022, again, a month before a Russian intervention, the outlets claimed that Ukraine might stage a chemical attack in Donbass and blame it on the separatist authorities. So let's pause here again for a moment. Disinformation narratives is like one thing, and of course there might be all the crazy narratives about Ukraine, about Georgia, Lugarlev, whatever. But this is also a classic example of false flag operations and false flag narratives in the information domain. So this is very classic military term, if we can say so, when actor stages an act and blames it to opposite party. So like others think that the opposite party did it. And in an information space, Russia uses this method and tactic very frequently. And these three narratives, what we see on the screen, and of course, these were not only three narratives, there were many others, but like these main three narratives were classic example of false flag operations uh, to then justify the intervention, because all the responses after war would be that we had information that like Kiev was violating ceasefire and that there was immediate risk and imminent risk that Ukraine would attack Donbass. Then, like, if you again like have concerns and criticize Russia for war, it say that it is not a war, but this is special military operation. And again, the response would be that no, we have evidence and proof that U.S. was training extremists for attack. And then the third one, when this weapons of mass destruction comes in the narrative, that's already very aggressive narrative and intensification of hostile narrative that like Ukraine might stage a chemical attack and blame Russia for it. So these narratives were also the basis for this whole information campaign and whole information operations to justify Russia's war. And this was also followed by offline activities using the leaders of separatist regimes in Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk, the Russian, Ukraine's Eastern Ukrainian regions. And several days before intervention, they announced mass evacuation of people because of imminent threat from Ukraine. And then they addressed Putin and asked them to defend their people. And then based on this legal background or legal basis and grounds, Putin starts intervention. So everything together, uh, of course, from this retrospective, it's very clear and it's understandable. But if we're doing narrative analysis and trying to look at bigger picture, even in November, we were able to understand that besides this mobilization of troops, besides all the concerns, besides all the statements from Western actors, the increase of these types of narratives, which really helped us to understand that Russia was preparing information ground as well for intervention and for starting reinvasion of Ukraine. And then just to continue this part, and then we can pause for and have a rest for a couple of minutes and break. At the anniversary of the war, we also published this huge report. So in that article, we analyzed up to 10, not up to 10, but 10 media outlets and up to 3,000 articles. But then we did the analysis of, I don't know, years long with disinformation campaign to understand the build up, disinformation build up of the war and how it was framed. And I will send the link to that report if you're interested. And like we analyze almost, I don't know, maybe 10,000 articles to understand all these false flag operations or accusing West of creating tensions and all the narratives that really helped to mobilize public opinion in Russia. If you have any questions on this part or the comments, or you want to share something in the chat, let's take like 2-3 minutes for that, and then we can have like 5 minutes break for like water to grab coffee or something, and then we can continue with the propaganda tools. I'll check the chat.
We have some questions in chat, so can you check it?
Yeah, what has to be done to prove the opposite? You mean to prove that the narrative is false, right? So there are multiple ways and multiple angles. And there are like many critiques that all these methods have critiques, but my opinion is that every tool is very important. Fact checking, media literacy, the educational programs, reforms related to it, the state position, and all this multi-angle approach and whole of the society approach is very important to deal with this propaganda machine. When we're talking about specific narratives, of course, fact checking is very important because it helps us to deconstruct the narrative and understand all these tools and tactics. And if you do not do that, it's really hard to analyze and see the big picture. And see the strategies behind the narratives. But analysis is also important. So one thing is proving that certain thing is false, but this type of analysis that I showcased, for example, to see like the spikes of distribution, to group certain narratives together. That's also very important uh, to counter this type of narratives. But broadly speaking, I believe that we're dealing not with like media outlets spreading like, I don't know, their opinion, but this is state-sponsored disinformation campaign and operations, and especially in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Moldova, and all the countries that Russia thinks that they should be under their influence and under Russia's domain, it is impossible to counter this scale of disinformation, which is like direct threat to national security without state policies and strict statements and strict positioning. And unfortunately, in certain countries, we see this type of issues that sometimes government enables Russian disinformation in domestically, and it's like another domain of disinformation. But again, to go back to answer, my answer would be that all the methods that are here, like fact checking, education, media literacy, banning, and some different state responses are all very important to counter this. I don't know this info idea. And thanks for sharing. I'll check it. Oh yeah, I know it. Sorry, I forgot the name. Are we okay to take like 5 to 5 minutes break? Very quick break. Okay. See you in 5 minutes then. Okay, let's continue. I think you had enough time to grab coffee, water, tea, or whatever. So this part is about propaganda techniques we mentioned and tools, the modern tools. We described how narrative is framed and how it shapes opinion and how many narratives are out there coming from Russian sources. And to spread and amplify those narratives, Russia uses different propaganda tactics and tools. And this is a very like old school, if we can say so, the classics of propaganda. The Institute of Propaganda Analysis that was established in 1937 to educate US audiences. So these are the main techniques, 7 techniques. We won't be going through each of those. And also I have mixture of these old tactics plus new tools, and we'll just like go through this, of course, through case studies and examples. But if you're interested to have that information and more details, of course, you're free to read about those techniques and the tools. And I can also share some materials about that. So let's start with the name calling, which is very frequently used in official statements, in the comments to discredit the opposite party or the person and the group. And also, this insulting labels help to shape opinion or bad actors. And also, just to have this disclaimer, we are not like I'm not claiming that these propaganda tools are only used by Russian actors or Russia invented these propaganda techniques. Of course not, but because of the work that the Lab does and because of my experience, most of the case studies and examples again are from Russian disinformation and Russian statements and Russian cases. But like I can recall a lot of domestic actor statements from Georgia, for example, about the ongoing protests that use this propaganda technique, which is like name calling, insulting, and all these terms. And some of the examples, again, this Nazi narrative that like Ukrainians are fascists, Ukrainians are Nazis, and the Westerns are Nazis, etc. One of the headlines from RIA, the Russian, the Kremlin-controlled media outlet that Putin called opposition funding from abroad, Banderlocks. The term is from Kipling's book Jungle, Book of Jungle, to describe the monkeys. So this insulting term. And this example from Maria Zakharova's statement from 2021, calling everything nonsense. This blatant nonsense, blatant nonsense. You can take this term keyword and search in Russian media outlets, you will have dozens and I don't know, maybe hundreds of examples of this nonsense and blatant nonsense as a keyword used to frame the opinion about certain topic and certain action. So this name calling, mockery, insulting, and these labels are one of the tactics very frequently used by domestic foreign actors, and in this case, Russia. This is my favorite technique. What about it? And again, this is also used around the world, especially about the protests. And if something happens, then some of the groups, I don't know, accuse you of taking sides, and then they are asking you, why are you not you protesting these, and why don't you care about the lives in there and here and these countries? And again, to mention this ongoing protests in Georgia, this is very like high topic and hot topic at the moment in the country. Like this regular ordinary citizens, and in these ordinary conversations I hear sometimes from elderly that if you're protesting this, why aren't you protesting that? And this is basically the technique of deflecting the discussion. And this was like just a minor example from like very ordinary discussion and conversation between one of my relatives, but the topic is huge and it's used strategically by Russian propaganda and officials to deflect the discussion, and especially if we have evidences and facts that Russia is behind something, war crimes, for example, or certain disinformation campaign. So reflecting this is, as we said, one of the discussions. So if we are talking about war in Ukraine, for example, and this, let's pay attention to dates. This is March 24th, 2022. So a month after Russia reinvaded Ukraine. And the title and the headline says like no mercy to civilians, peaceful citizens, what NATO did in Europe. So like we're talking about Russian invasion, and then Russian media headline is that what NATO did in Europe. Of course, all this some content is legitimate, some questions should be asked, and nobody is perfect, but like the aim of the coming with these questions and this deflection is to avoid responsibility, existing responsibility, in this case, of Russia. What did US in Yugoslavia, for example, and how they broke or like the bombed, of course, this is for like broke the international law again in March on the same day in 2022. So again, criticism, all the concerns of Russia's war in Ukraine, and these two headlines are the deflection and why NATO is bad and why US is bad. From Georgia, again, one of the headlines from Georgian example, I can recall the information campaign of pro-Kremlin political parties ahead of 2016 or no, 2019 elections, I think, when some banners appeared as a pro-election information campaign of the party, they claimed that if Russia is occupier, then Turkey is enemy of Georgia too, and they equated Russian occupation with Turkish economic influences in one of the Georgian regions. And basically, when you were asking some critical questions about their pro-Russian stance, instead of answering those critical questions and concerns, they were starting a conversation about Turkey. So this is fallacy. This is attempt of deflecting, as I said, the discussion and the responsibilities, and especially in social media, in the comment section, we see a lot of whataboutism in the comment section, especially if we have evidence that this narrative framing in the comment section is coordinated and like certain actor is behind it, then these messages and the topics might be pre-arranged, and then fake accounts, some suspicious accounts might be like dropping these topics on purpose. Another interesting is, again, like shifting from this old propaganda techniques, provocations or provoking questions, which is also very fun sometimes. This, like, I don't know, so-called clever question that who might be behind this, who might benefit from this, and we have like multiples of examples. This one is from bombing the Kramatorsk railway in Ukraine, and Russian Telegram channels post this question, like speak for those who might be benefiting from this. Some of the crazy narratives also said that Ukraine did it because they wanted to avoid evacuation, when in fact Ukraine did its best to evacuate peaceful population, civilians. Um, so yeah, these questions are always very frequently used in different domestic developments as well. And also that contributes to another technique, which is conspiracy theories, that you always think that there is, I don't know, the a secret, strong, anonymous group which might be behind this, and that they are staging all this. And when there are like very open evidences and fact that certain actor, and in this case we're talking about Russian bombing Ukraine, is behind Russia, then like creating these counter questions that no, maybe Ukraine is behind it, and maybe Ukraine bombed its own citizens and population. So this type of questions are sometimes it's very legitimate to ask those questions, and it's very like there is a narrow border between like legitimate discussion and then this provoking question is tool of propaganda, and analyzing this content is very, very interesting and intriguing for me as well to see those coordinated questioning in certain Telegram posts and certain coordinated messages coming from official sources. One of the new approaches, as we already discussed with Malaysian, the MH17 downing, also the COVID-19 pandemic, to exhaust the information space with many, many messages. One of the examples, I also mentioned the Skripal case, like, I don't know, this at least 200 messages. This is older screen from different disinformation databases about the Novichok, about the poisoning, again, the opposing narratives. And let's stop here and not go into details about this because we discussed many cases about that. Again, this Russophobia narrative is also one of the major tools in their toolbox. And another one is denying, even if you have all the evidences. One of the tactics of Kremlin is to deny everything. So if the information is uncomfortable, you deny everything and you just say that there is no evidence. There is no evidence. And then, like, in combination with what about is this provoking messages, of course, in combination, this creates all the propaganda and disinformation. This should not be taken as like separate tools that like Russia uses only one tool or like this one. In combination, they are using all these tools. And of course, this is then interesting to analyze, especially for people who love analyzing the content and the keywords and speeches and all the statements. For example, about MH17, like this, I don't know, lawyer. And very frequently, these lawyers and experts are anonymous or they do not really exist and they are not really lawyers. That there is no evidence that was downed. Again, the need is the MFA that there is no evidence that Russia is linked to provocations in Bucha. This is very interesting word which is used here, provocation in Bucha, and other cases as well. And about the words, this is very logical continuation. This is also very interesting. I love analyzing content, and this is very interesting to understand all the keywords and why they're choosing specific words and to read between the lines. That's why I love this type of methods. And then on the other side, when you see those messages between the lines, that's very, very interesting. We are calling this usage of the newspeak. This term is borrowed from famous 1984 novel when there you change the words and portray specific events so that aligns with your agenda, and if there is like strong words that should be used, then you choose another word which is like softer. And very frequently in Russia, in Russian media, this is also used to target domestic audiences and to shape domestic opinions about war in Ukraine, for example. And for example, if there was an explosion, they won't say that this was explosion. Alternative word for that is eclipse. So there was an explosion in one of the and Russian media outlets use this term that this was clap and it was not an explosion. Another something on fire. Fire is the word, right? It's like something is on fire. Alternative words in Russian media, Kremlin-controlled media, is covered in smoke. And one of the very funny cases is this one, covered in smoke. Smoke happened or covered in smoke happened, like the grammar allows you in Russian, of course, but I don't know how to say that in English. But this covered in smoke happened as an event is very interesting because like fire is not the word they need to use, they want to use, because then it proves something or is very strong message. It might be proving that Russia is weak, for example, and they need some softer messages for domestic audiences. And to prove that Russia is weak and to deny that narrative, for example, if there is retreat after defeat on the battlefield, then this is portrayed as Russia's goodwill gesture or regrouping of troops. And this is very notable as well from various operations in Ukraine. Again, some of the headlines in Russian using specifically these keywords that there was retreat after defeat, and Russian headlines claimed that it was goodwill gesture, that Russia is very kind, or regrouping of the troops. In this era, of course, we also have lots of memes and compilations of images, of course, used by foreign actors, used by domestic actors. On social media, we see that these type of posts are also sponsored. And this is basically um, how people interact with the information, because like all these long articles and texts are really hard to digest. And for propaganda purposes, you need very catchy headlines, very catchy images, and like these memes are very famous on social media. Sometimes they are really very funny, and sometimes on other side, those memes are also used for information campaigns. But we've seen a lot of propaganda memes, especially coming from this famous troll factory that was interfering in the US elections and elections in the world, like the worldwide. And from the US reports, this is the source you see on the screen. And older reports also are there, and I can share some screen. Sorry? Sorry, can you mute yourself? Sandro, yeah, sorry.
So we already done. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, this war of memes is also one of the modern tactics. As I said, that there are many reports of interference of this internet research agency, which is also famous for with the name Troll Factory of St. Petersburg, because of this famous building. I'm sure you've seen the images of their like former office, and this whole network of fake websites and like fake events and fake discussions and memes were created to target Western audiences, especially ahead of very crucial political decisions or elections. And these memes are very like another genre of analyzing disinformation and propaganda. One of my favorite genres, if we can say so, is also to analyze the humor programs. At some point, you think that this is like culinary program, TV. It's not like news media or like I don't know, the news program. But this like hidden messages of propaganda and these entertaining programs are very interesting to analyze. And one of the most important are the is the amplifiers. So there is one thing that there is content and the narrative and disinformation, and we already discussed many cases of Russian narrative warfare. But then these narratives must be amplified. And there are different and various amplifiers in specific audiences. So this is from the State Department report. Yeah, this is the link, and I can also send all these links, all the links I mentioned, and all the readouts I will create into one compilation, like readout of the slides and all the resources, and I will share it later. These are as I said, this is report from State Department compiling all the proxy amplifiers of Russian disinformation and false narratives in the US audiences and in different languages. So like one thing is targeting domestic audiences, one thing is creating Russian disinformation messages, but then in English, this also needs to be amplified. We also mentioned some fake experts, some former employees of the US institutes, etc. And for example, this Veterans Today Global Research Center, there was Strategic Culture Center, which is also like Thai of a Russian agency that used these fake Western experts and also created content in English language to proliferate the Western audiences. So these outlets had global reach, and as I said, it created content in multiple languages and had very specific languages. We also had one news front. I'm sure that you're aware of it. It was based in Russia annexed Crimea, and they claimed that they are the alternative source of information, and they created content in multiple languages, including in Georgia. Maybe you also had Newsfront before it was banned on Facebook too, and exposed in your countries as well. And also we have useful idiots wittingly or unwittingly repeating the same messages and proliferating this Russian narratives. And yeah, so this type of organizations, news outlets, magazines, and some entities or think tanks are sometimes connected to Russian disinformation campaigns, and they are amplifying these narratives. Today, the amplification in Western audiences is very interesting, especially after the ban of certain outlets, also the sanctions and exposure, and this image is also very dropped, and it's not trustful anymore, and some of these organizations are already exposed. And now we see the switch of this amplification of tactic in social media through online amplifiers, such as like public opinion leaders or influencers, or especially on Twitter, which is the most famous platform in the West for the Western audiences. Last year, we saw policy changes in Twitter, and that contributed to amplification of Russian messages and disinformation, especially from the accounts that have this blue badge of verification. So this verification policy changed, and we ended up with verified suspicious suspicious accounts promoting Russian disinformation on Twitter. So that became one of the tools for Kremlin how to proliferate Western audiences when Sputnik, Russia Today, and other media outlets creating content in multiple languages were banned. So this amplifiers are always there, and sometimes they change according to the contexts and specific developments. One of the tools is also weaponization of comments section. And on the left side, you see very funny screen. This is how you can identify this comment. So if you take Russian keywords for reader, читатели, and then take this, like the formula of searching on specific website, if you're interested, for example, this can be Sputnik or RIA or whatever. In this case, we have example of comment section on RIA website. This is the comment section under the article itself. So some of the websites have it, some don't, but like Russian media outlets usually have those because this is instrumentalized, weaponized. We have very suspicious comments there. Sometimes it's artificial. And basically, it is an attempt to portray, like to shape public opinion. So when the reader is reading something, the content, and then in the comment section, they might think that like real users and real readers are posting their opinion under Russian media websites. And this screen is very funny here, this one on the left side. Chinese comments, for example, from Chinese readers or from different European countries. Very frequently we see this, that they are criticizing their own governments, especially the European governments, and praising Russian governments. So this creates this illusion that citizens reading Russian news outlets then are commenting, criticizing the freedom of speech and all these liberties and I don't know, repressions in the European environment, and then praising Russian ones. So others, so the real readers, so read these articles, then think that these articles are very genuine. And this was also used during that mass evacuation from Eastern Ukrainian territory stories that like the population thinks so, and one of the readers said so. This is again creating this false illusion that we people, ordinary people, are involved in this discussion and they are agreeing with Russian agenda and Russian uh, narratives. And the last one is the weaponization of debunks. This is also one of the modern tools. I mentioned fact checking several times, and this is very important tool on our side to fight disinformation and expose disinformation, one of the tools. And then when our war started in Ukraine, we saw that Russia started to weaponize the fact checking as well and used this fake fact checking against genuine fact checking. So they created this waronfakes.com. Initially, it started as a Telegram channel, and then they created the website. It was, if I'm not wrong, on the same day of invasion. And they are fact checking information that is already fact-checked by genuine organizations and saying, for example, if the fact-checking organization says that this is false and this is Russian disinformation, then they are fact-checking these fact-checked claims. And unfortunately, we're seeing this in domestic political developments and the domestic contexts as well. I can recall several in Georgian context, which is not coming necessarily from Russia, but they are like domestic actors and they are using this weaponization of fact-checking as a tool themselves as well. And there are many, many reports from trustful sources about war on fakes, and you can read those if you're interested in this method. One of the examples is the Bucha case and Bucha massacre. And you see that they are using the same structure, even that like fake, this is fake, no, this is truth. And they are saying that it is fake that Russians left Bucha and left killed people there. And then they were claiming that no, like these people were moving. Unfortunately, they were dead because of Russia. And this glitch in low resolution video that creates this impression that the body is moving was used by this War on Fake Telegram channel to create this whole new conspiracy and disinformation and false narrative that Ukraine staged Bucha and Russia did not participate in it. And again, this is again one of the methods to deflect responsibility and start totally new discussion. Okay, let's have two examples. I want you to name the tool that we discussed. So let's read the example. It's very easy, I'm sure, for you. I have two examples. Post in the chat, or I don't know, just say it out loud what you think about this. And then we can switch to Q&A. So it's a very old case in 2006 when Litvinenko was poisoned. Financial Times published editorial about that. And the Russian embassy had this response. Why not mind your British business thoroughly and ask why nobody has been until now held responsible for the British dead in the war in Iraq? What is this? What type of propaganda technique? Yes, sure. What about? And another one. You remember this girl in Mariupol when the maternity house was bombed? Famous pictures of injured pregnant woman. And Russian embassy in the UK said that this is beauty blogger. She's an actor. She played the roles of pregnant women before. And then another post that our rating is false based on our research and so on. That this attack on Mariupol birth house was false. What methods would you attribute to this? Yes, weaponization of the bank. What else? This is a combination of many techniques, but like two most weaponization. One, another one. Deny. Yes, it was in the replies. I almost, yeah. Denial, of course, because it's not comfortable. Same what happened with Bucha case, what we described, that what were fake state that no, Russia is not responsible. Ukraine staged it. We can attribute this denial to almost every uncomfortable claim for Russia. And of course, this is like fake fact checking and weaponization of fake fact checking. Let's conclude the like this discussion here. This is a huge topic, and there are many other tactics and methods. We can also recall this famous 4D framework of Russian disinformation, but there are many more, and it evolved, and that's why I did not bring it. But yeah, this deflection, here tactics, like if you join NATO, we will do this and that, warmongering tactics, and all the other tools. So, like during this program, we will discuss many other cases, of course, and we can go back to these propaganda tools and name certain tools while we discuss some other cases. But yeah, this is the major overview of Russian InfoOps, how Russia approaches information operations, what tools do they use, and how they attempt to uh, shape opinion through lies and disinformation. And as I said, this was more of overview and an intro to other more practical sessions we have ahead. And now I'll stop. We have around, yes, 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, feedback, you want some discussions, you're free to drop in the chat or say it out loud. Yeah. Um, So once again, we can you can also test it. The Luger Lab case that I brought is very new and from this morning. All these other cases were a bit old, but I was interested how Luger Lab was framed. Basically, this means that Yandex search engine is controlled by Kremlin-aligned groups, and it's artificially manipulates how information is brought to you. So if you use Yandex search engine and if you type Bucha, information and pictures about Bucha are not war related or war crimes related, but it's like, I don't know, some sterile images of buildings, etc. Why? Because Russia needs to hide that information. And you only get that information if you change settings and say to Yandex that I do not want this like general results, but I need specific results from like newest updates. And then you get some information. Even not from the pictures, but the headlines. We saw some examples when the results are aggregated in a way that plays around Kremlin agenda and brings the results and headlines that are aligned with Kremlin messages. And this is totally different from Google. So if I want to search for genuine information and I'm interested in, I must find it, it's a huge presentation, and want to check information in credible sources, then checking information in English keywords in Google is better. But sometimes I need to understand the scale of proliferation of certain disinformation narrative, and I'm interested in Russian sources of disinformation. In that case, for research purposes, it's better to search that keyword in Yandex. So in that case, we will have mapping of Russian actors and Russian disinformation sources. Um, did it answer your question, or do you need more information about that? Any other question? I'll also join the Slack channel if it's fine, Sandra, on your end. So if there are like questions,
Sure, thank you.
some
So I
immediate
shared
questions.
new link of Slack. So actually, this new link doesn't have any kind of problem. So everybody can join us. And also after this training, we will send this link on your emails as well.
Should we conclude
Sophia,
or wait?
Sophia,
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
hear me? Yes,
yes.
thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I have a question. Do you see any fake news propaganda regarding the events, the current events that is happening right now in Georgia in regards to the Russian law? Do you
Yeah,
see? Yeah.
yes, they're very important and timely question. We see both Russian actors and domestic actors spreading same disinformation narratives, and basically this happened last year too. To bring very brief context, the Georgian Dream introduced foreign agents law last year in March, which resembles the Russian law, which is similar there, which was adopted in 2012, and it restricted all the organizations and media outlets that had funding from the Western audiences, from the Western funds, sorry. And then last year we had huge protests, and Georgian Dream dropped the law, and they promised that they would not reintroduce this law. And this year, on April 3rd, they reintroduced it, and this is what is happening, all this massive protests and all these concerns from Western partners, etc., that this law would shift Georgia's foreign policy. The disinformation narrative, what I've monitored in Russian sources and Georgian domestic sources, is that the protest is framed as Maidan, attempt of Maidan, which is very famous Kremlin narrative, which frames Kiev Euromaidan in 2014 as a coup and overthrowing of government that was backed by the US. And this famous narrative of this color revolution, and I also mentioned this EU versus disinfo platform. If you type color revolution, you will see like hundreds of cases. This is one of the major narrative that is spread, that the protest is backed from the West, and that this is the attempt of revolution. And then based on this major narrative, we see sub narratives. Again, one of these Western experts was used to amplify the narrative that the US was planning revolution in October. And that was very notable
Yes.
the detail, because in October we have very crucial parliamentary elections, and basically that meant that even like whatever the result is, they are creating the ground to claim that the US was behind the results, and that the US planned revolution if the results are not favorable for the government. So unfortunately, we've seen alignment between domestic actors and Russian threat actors in terms of narratives, as I said last year and this year too. And what is new is that we've seen lots of sponsored disinformation on Facebook.
Oh, I see. Thank you very much. Okay. And there's
Yeah.
just another question, Sophia, from you see, is the scale to measure threats universal?
I don't see that question.
You didn't see it? It's from the participant. Is the scale to measure threats 6 degrees universal? That's what is written.
Let me find it, because
No, you
was
can.
it shared to like group chat or
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think, yeah.
I think it's direct message, not shared group chat.
Oh, probably. Oh. So can you copy Sandro and show it to Sophia? Oh, you cannot see it either? Oh, one moment. I can, one moment. Uh, message to meeting group. Okay.
Yeah.
So 1 moment. This is her question. Sophia, can you see it?
Yeah. I think I don't understand the question. What is measure universal? Like, who's the author of the question? Could you clarify your question?
It says RA. But I don't see her real name. I mean,
Oh,
her.
sorry. You meant the stages that we discussed in the beginning of the presentation, the degrees of proliferation and the effect.
Yes, she wrote yes. Because she's keep writing too directly to me, and that's why you cannot see it.
Okay.
So yes, she's saying yes.
Yes, yeah. I understood. Sorry. Yeah, there are multiple tools, and we use social media listening tools to measure scale of amplification on social media, because in this case, we're talking about online information operations. And for Facebook, we will be talking later tomorrow about that. And I can also share this whole report about investigating and approaching information operations, where I took those screenshots of ABCDE framework and also measurement of a degree. And at some point, it's a certain scale, especially when it has the risks of offline amplification. We also need some additional information, sometimes from social media platforms, sometimes if like security services are on our side and like willing to share information which are really relevant for that disinformation campaign. For example, when we were discussing this Lugar case and some disinformation cases, we had partnership with the Lugar Lab, and they shared the information about the narratives, about the like genuine information about the work to us, so we could then inform public. So it is very combination of different tools what we need to use to measure the degree. But basically, again, if we're talking about open source and not the closed source and some, I don't know, contacts in different institutions, we'll be discussing some online research tools that helps us to understand the amplification, to measure reach, and the tools that are free to use. It depends on the audience. It's not universal. It's more targeted. If we're talking about disinformation campaign in Georgia or in certain country, then we can take specific keywords in local language if it's amplified in the local language, and then measure local audience and proliferation in local audience. Sometimes when we're talking about, like, I don't know, the pandemic video that I mentioned, the fake, like the conspiracy documentary in English, then you can measure not only in the US, for example, but in like English speaking countries as well. So it depends on language, and tools are also tailored to larger languages, unfortunately, and there are many limitations when we're talking about smaller languages. But yeah, it depends on case. It might be worldwide case involving multiple actors and multiple countries, but sometimes, not sometimes, we still need to measure effect and outreach and distribution if we're talking about local operations too. Because like, yeah, sometimes if you see that it was not amplified, it had already like 100 shares, for example, maybe it's better to ignore it. It depends on the policies of your organizations, and that's why it's really interesting. If you're doing fact checking, for example, or research, maybe checking that effect distribution will help you to set the policy, how you respond to certain disinformation. We do have that at DF11. That's why I'm sharing that information. Any other questions?
So I guess there are no more questions. Oh, there is a questions. Yeah. So let's say trust and safety.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. And we have partnership with Facebook at the moment, and this partnership works in this way that, for example, if we do investigation on Facebook and we think that we uncovered inauthentic network, and we will be talking about this, what the inauthentic network is, and etc. tomorrow, we share the list of assets to them, and then they might share additional information which is not available for us through open source resources, so we can build like our research on their information too. So yeah, the trust and safety teams, social media platforms are very, very important in dealing with disinformation. And that's why I also mentioned Twitter and how the policies changed and how it affected partnerships with organizations, and also how it affected amplification of disinformation. So those policies are very important.
Thank you once more, Sofa.
Thank
Thank
you very
you,
much,
every
Sophia.
participants.
And we're going to have tomorrow at the same time, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
Facebook analysis.
Facebook analysis. Thank you very much, Sophia, for a wonderful presentation, and see you
Thank you
tomorrow.
for being here and questions. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. You too. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.